Ik ben Hans Lambeau, hoofdredacteur van Database Magazine. En dit keer is mijn gast op BI-platform Colin White, een onafhankelijk docent, auteur en analist, vooral bekend van het BI-network. Welcome, Colin.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes. Colin, looking at the BI world of today, what are the hottest items?
That's an interesting question. I mean, there are a number of hot items. I must probably give you four, I think. Number one would be operational business intelligence. So of the three kinds of business intelligence that exist, strategic, tactical and operational, was probably the fastest growing area is operational BI. And that's sort of starting to mature now. Perhaps the newer evolving technologies, the three would be collaborative business intelligence, mobile business intelligence, and the use of cloud computing in the business intelligence environment. So cloud, mobile and collaboration would be the newer ones, with operational BI sort of being more mature and now starting to gain traction.
And which of those items has the most impact, do you think?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Impact from a business viewpoint or impact from an IT viewpoint?
For the BI world,
I think most probably for the business, operational BI has the biggest impact from a business viewpoint, because I think people are now starting to use operational BI to address really their day-to-day business problems and individual business processes, and that's where they're getting the biggest return on investment. I think things like collaborative BI, mobile BI and cloud computing, I think they aid the business, but they also significantly aid IT in terms of faster development, reducing costs and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Could you give us a definition of collaborative BI?
Well, there's several ways of looking at this. I mean, if I was to use a legacy term, it would be knowledge management. But knowledge management comes from about, 10 years ago. And at that time it was very theoretical in nature. It was all about really extending decision making with expertise and knowledge and enabling people to collaborate better. And I think there was a lot of theory at that time, but not much practice, and therefore it got baggage. So I think now, for a number of reasons, web technology being one of them, and even the cloud to a certain extent, the collaborative capabilities in IT organizations today are considerably better than they were 10 years ago. And now we're starting to see BI technologies and collaborative technologies starting to merge together. And there are really two uses of collaboration, I think, in the BI field. One is to add the context and business content to business intelligence. So it adds business meaning, business knowledge, it puts it in a business context, and we can do that by really people giving feedback, rating business intelligence, sharing business intelligence. So that's one use, increasing the knowledge content of BI by putting it much more into a business context. And then the other use of collaboration is to use collaborative technologies to enable groups of people to work together to make decisions. So two distinct areas, adding business value, business context, making BI richer, so people can make, I tend to think of it as making information more consumable by business users. And the other is using collaborative technologies to enable specialists and BI experts to communicate with each other, share knowledge and expertise, and actually collaboratively make decisions, record the decisions they make and the information they used in that decision-making process. So you could go back 6 months later and say, well, why did we make this decision? What information did we base it on? And so on. So two distinct uses of collaboration. And I think it's the web and cloud computing and improvement generally in collaborative technologies that enable that to happen.
Business intelligence in the cloud, is that a hype or?
Oh, I think so, yes. But it's at the top of the hype cycle at the moment. So everyone's talking about it. There's a lot more talking than doing, I think. But it has a lot of potential benefit. It's like a lot of new technology. It doesn't replace what we've done. It's another piece of the puzzle, or another tool in the toolbox. There are certain things that we can do in the cloud that are more effective to do there than, say, on premises. I actually think we'll move to an environment where we'll end up with hybrid situations. We'll do something on premises and we'll do some things in the cloud. And the things we do in the cloud, it may be we prototype new applications, or we may develop applications in the cloud for deployment in-house, or we may run some applications in the cloud and some applications in-house, and we will make the two work together. So I believe we'll use hybrid solutions, so the cloud doesn't replace what we do, but it expands the ability to do things possibly we couldn't cost effectively do before. Mm-hmm. Or in fact, in some cases, it enables us to do things faster because of IT backlogs or IT lack of budget.
Mm-hmm. And web data, it's nothing more than a new source of data for business intelligence?
Well, I think it's good and bad in the sense I think the web creates more information, not only structured information but a lot of unstructured information. For example, social computing now, people are expressing opinions about products and services of companies, and that's giving, if people can sort of get that information and analyze it, tells them a lot about how people feel about their products, what's working, what isn't. So I think a lot of companies are interested in not only gathering data from operational systems, but gathering information from the web as well for all sorts of purposes, competitive analysis, to social media in terms of understanding how people feel about their products. So I think that has value. The problem is it increases data volumes. But we've always tended to do that. Our data volumes have always increased. But I think we're seeing, particularly in the database field now, some interesting technologies appearing. Rick van der Laan talks about NoSQL products. But even in the SQL database area, we're now seeing analytical database appliances coming out, which provide very cost-effective ways of analyzing huge amounts of data, particularly web data, and we can do things now that we couldn't cost-effectively do before. So I think, yes, the data volumes are increasing, but I think we're seeing both hardware and software technology, particularly in database processing, being able to handle a lot of those volumes. And I think the other thing you have to remember, I like to talk about the sort of gee whiz projects with petabytes of data. If you actually go and analyze the average corporation, they're not dealing with petabytes of data, do they? They're in sort of even tens of terabytes are big in many data warehouses. So I think you do get these groups of companies. Some groups have crossed the chasm, are always on the bleeding edge. The e-tailers are particularly like that. One, because they can leverage the data, but two, they have no legacy. So you think of Amazon and eBay, they don't have any legacy systems, and therefore they can move forward much more rapidly. Whereas if you're an old financial institution or old bank or manufacturing company, you have a lot of legacy to deal with. So I think you have to split the problem into the legacy systems and really building newer systems to deal with the new data like web data. Yeah. So it's easier for, I think, e-tailers to be much more agile, and that's certainly the way people have crossed the chasm and are on the bleeding edge. And the good thing about that, they sort of iron out they dot the I's and cross the T's, sort of solidify the technology, so the more mainstay IT-driven companies that have been around for a number of years can actually follow behind them.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think will be a hot issue in 2011?
I think it will be sort of building on the base. In other words, I think if we go back over the last year or two, I think web technology in general, or Enterprise 2.0, or Web 2.0, whatever you want to call it, has had a significant impact on the BI space. And I think so these things like the cloud and mobile and even operational BI to a certain extent sort of are connected to that. Most probably if I had to choose one that will really gain ground over the next 24 months, I think it's going to be mobile computing, mobile BI. And there are a number of reasons for that. And I've been really surprised by, particularly in the US, I come to Europe quite a lot, and there's always been a certain interest in mobile BI in Europe, but not in the US. But all of a sudden in the US, the interest is taken off dramatically. So if I have to say the one that's come to the top of the hype cycle next is most probably going to be mobile business intelligence,
Thanks very much for being our guest, Colin.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. I appreciate it.